In this video, I will manifest new elemental reactions and kits for the major endgame characters, like the Shades. Since the idea for this video stemmed from my disappointment that Skirk didn't use Abyssal powers, it's only right that I start with the Abyss element. At this point, I don't think it makes sense for the game to introduce the Abyss element as a separate element, but instead, it could include Abyssal reactions in the kits of characters with Abyssal powers. So for example, the Sinners would have an Abyssal passive in addition to whatever other powers they may have. This passive would trigger Abyssal reactions with elements it come into contact with. These would be a corrupted form of the reactions, as the Abyss element would make these reactions or elements cytotoxic. Look at me using big words. I don't know if I'm using it right, but I learned this word recently from watching doctors react to episodes of the anime Cells at Work. Basically, cytotoxic cells are your body's killer T cells, responsible for killing infected or cancerous cells. So, for amplifying reactions like vaporize or melt, this could be an increase in the reaction multiplier of 0.5 or 1 for each element the Abyss element comes into contact with. So, for example, a team member applies Khaenri'ah to an enemy, then the character with Abyssal powers attacks that enemy and applies the Abyss element, then a Pyro character attacks the enemy. This will trigger Abyssal melt. In this example, 0.5 or 1 would be added when the Abyss element came into contact with the Khaenri'ah on the enemy, and another 0.5 or 1 when Pyro came in contact with the Abyssal element already on the enemy. So the Abyssal melt would have a multiplier of 3 or 4 instead of 2 for normal melt reaction.
Lord have mercy, I'm about to bust.
The same would apply for other reactions. So if set up right, reverse vaporize would have a multiplier of 3 or 4. Reverse melt and vaporize would have a multiplier of 2.5 or 3.5. For transformative reactions like overload, shattered, electrocharge, superconduct, swirl, burning, bloom, hyperbloom, burgeon, the abyssal version of these reactions, for example abyssal overload or abyssal hyperbloom, would have a higher base damage determined by the type of reaction and the level of the character triggering the reaction, which would then be multiplied by a higher percentage determined by the elemental master of the character. Or applying the Abyss element in these reactions would result in the regular reaction, but also an instance of abyssal damage, calculated with a smaller base damage and percentage. Let's move on to the shades. I'm going to start with the shade that I am most excited for, Ronova. I really like her design. The wings with the eyes are pretty cool. For Ronova, there are a number of ideas I was thinking about, the first one being decay slash death slash fatal reactions, similar to, for example, lunar reactions. She applies death to team members' attacks, which either A, converts their elemental attacks to decay slash death slash fatal elemental attacks. So if you trigger, for example, hyperbloom, melt, vape, etc., these get converted to fatal hyperbloom, fatal melt, fatal vape, decay, death, whichever word you want to use there to describe those reactions. Or B, with each instance of reaction damage, for example bloom, hyperbloom, melt, she also triggers a decay slash death slash fatal bloom, decay slash death slash fatal hyperbloom, decay slash death slash fatal melt. You get the point. This would have its own reaction multiplier or scaling with a EM, attack, HP, etc. So you would have the regular reaction plus then a fatal reaction of similar strength or lesser strength in addition with the regular reaction. This additional decay slash death reaction would be a form of true damage per se that bypasses defense, resistance, and damage reduction, maybe even shields. This might be a bad idea, because I can already see the bosses and enemies that will get added to the Abyss, Imaginarium, Theater, and Sigil Onslaught, with a bunch of restrictions that you can only beat basically if you have Ronova on your team to do decay slash true damage, which bypasses these shields and restrictions in order to clear in time. This decay effect is what Abyssal Powers could have done, to be honest, since for example we have to apply a bunch of elemental attacks to certain Abyss monsters to break their Abyss state or form per se before we can deal damage to them. The decay reactions would also weaken enemies' elemental resistances and shields as well. 2. She could have a form of bleed slash decay effect in combat, similar to Rift Hounds either as a passive, preferably, or one of her abilities, which makes her enter a dead state or a stance, where she continuously decays living things. She would automatically and continuously drain party members and enemies' HP by a certain percent, or based on level, attack, or energy, maybe within a certain range. Playing her would require a good team healer. This would be a passive form of damage over time, counted as HP loss. 3. She could also trigger coordinated attacks, similar to Xingqiu's ranged swords, which do true damage. In this instance, she would only work with normal attackers. I'm a big fan of Ronova having true damage in her kit, since she has control over the power of death, which in my mind is an unstoppable force. All living things have to / can die eventually. 4. She could also use curses / place a death mark or curse on enemies, similar to Arlecchino's mark. She did curse the people of Khaenri'ah after all. Sorry, Pierre. For example, her attacks apply a curse / death mark, where enemies take more damage based on how much damage they receive after the curse was placed. Similar to how the Cactus boss takes damage after breaking his shield based on how much Hydra, Electra charge, and Luna charge damage it received during the hot state. It could be 0.5 to 1, 1 to 1, or 1.5 to 1. So if your team does 1 million damage during the time the mark was placed, she will do 500k, 1 million, or 1.5 million damage. This could be an instance of damage each time damage is done, or a nuke damage at the end of the mark. She could also place an immortality curse on team members, which freezes their health, defense, shield strength, etc. Or for a specified time or during a specified state, team members take no damage, reduce damage, or cannot die. She could also increase team members' interruption resistance rather than Mavuika levels. In essence, she weakens enemies, increases team members' damage and survivability. 5th and final for Ronova, she could raise an army of undead or transform into an undead form. At this point, I'm just throwing shit out there. Anything that related, to be honest, just not an element. Please hold it. These could be undead in the form of skeleton army or soldiers. However, if the game doesn't want to go that dark, could be that she summons people who have died. In this case, strong people are vision bearers. For example, the previous Hydra Archon, Ruka Devata, Vanessa, Kazua's friend, King Deshret if he's not going to be playable, or even Signora. Signora means rise up. I just had to do it. As it relates to visual effects, her attacks would add a black hue / tint to elemental reactions, you know, death and all. Moving on to Istaroth, I think Istaroth could be the most broken support in the game. With her using time as her power, her element, her abilities could include, for example, 1. Reducing or removing the cooldown of team members' elemental skills and bursts. Removing the cooldowns completely might be too OP, especially for characters who don't use energy for their bursts or have low energy requirements, or characters who do damage with their skill. 2. She could reduce the ICDs of character skills, bursts, and elemental reactions. This could be by a number of seconds, for example 3 to 4 seconds, or by a percentage, for example 40%, or completely remove the ICDs for team members. This idea is the one I'm most excited about. In my mind, this would be OP. I feel like this would break the meta and break the game. I'm not a theory crafter, but I'm curious to know how this ability would affect the meta. Which characters and team comps will benefit the most or be the most broken with Istaroth on the team. Maybe I'm overestimating how difficult it would be to code, underestimating the game's ability to keep up with such an ability, and overestimating how good this ability would be. But either way, in my mind, I feel like this ability would break open the meta. 3. Her powers could include fast forwarding, rewinding, slowing down, and freezing time. This would include abilities such as 1. Slowing down enemies' movement speed, attack speed, and/or frequency of attacks. 2. Freezing enemies by stopping time. This would also work on boss enemies. 3. Speeding up your character's attack speed, movement speed, and healing. 4. Freezing your character's health, shield, and buffs at a particular time for a set duration of time. For example, casting her skill applies a freeze state to team member stats. This prevents any increase or decrease in their stats for, let's say, 4 or 5 seconds. So team members' health wouldn't decrease by damage taken during this period because their health is frozen as at a particular time in the past when the skill was cast. Look at me rhyming. 5. She could heal team members by reversing time to a point in time before they receive damage. So they would be healed in quotations by the amount of damage taken, which is basically rewinding time to before they took the damage. 6. She could extend the duration of team members' abilities like buffs, healing, shields. 7. She could reduce the duration of enemies' abilities as well. It would be dope if she could also reduce the boss's time wasting animations as well. But we move. Time is a very powerful power. With her control of it, there's so much that she could do to enemies and for her teammates. Now let's talk about Rhinedottir / Naberius. Rhinedottir was the character I was most excited for based on her lore. I'm not a huge fan of her design, to be honest. I'm not sure if it's a color scheme or just her outfit in general. I was hoping she looked like a research scientist or kind of a mad scientist vibe mixed with a bit of dark academia. Instead, she looks like a nun. She reminds me of Rosaria. Maybe it's the headgear. I don't know. Anyway, in terms of her power, I think she should use the power of alchemy. That's her element. She doesn't need pyro, cryo, anymore, or whatever. Straight up alchemy. She's known for creating many creatures and even a human being in Albedo using alchemy. And this was before she merged with the Shade of Life. I remember when I was ranting back in May when I saw that Skirk didn't use the Abyss element. I was like, there's no hope for Rhinedottir. She's going to use one of the 7 elements when she should be using the power of alchemy itself. She should be creating and or summoning her creatures during battle, and her bird should summon the Cataclysm plus a nail from Celestia. At the time I was joking about the nail from Celestia, but who would have thought that she would have merged with the Shade of Life and became a sort of shade herself? I learned that sometime later, as I still haven't done the paralogism. Paralogism? I'm not even sure how that were pronounced. I'm calling it paralogism. Gism. I still haven't done the paralogism quest as yet, but I saw people discussing it online. So, her abilities would include either creating summons on the spot or summoning creatures she has made, ones we know about and even others we may not yet know about. The type of creatures that she summoned and their abilities can be based on the elements of your party members, something like an alchemical version of Chaska. For example, her skill summons one creature that we don't know about yet, a specific chimera-like creature that she has made for her personal use in combat. The attacks and abilities of that creature is dependent on the elements of your party members, so it has different abilities for different element types. Let's say, for example, it's a 3-headed dragon or snake. Each head of the dragon will do elemental attacks based on the elements of your party members. Each head can only do one type of elemental attack, so you would need to use 3 different elements in your team to get the best result. The dragon in this scenario would be like Chaska's gun. They could take it a step further and make it so that either the creature / dragon creates alchemical / alchemized reactions based on the elements of the party members. So if, for example, there's a pyro, cryo, and hydro character in the team, it randomly creates enchanted vapes, enchanted melt, and enchanted freeze reactions. The enchanted part is due to the power of alchemy acting on these elements, alchemizing them. This could be done as an off-field ability once you summon the creature, or she could be an on-field DPS and play a role similar to an anima driver. So with her basic attacks, she is adding alchemy / alchemizing the elements of your party members to create these enchanted reactions, either herself or through the summon mentioned earlier. These enchanted reactions would have bigger multipliers and a gold hue to / around them. Her nickname is Gold after all.
Perfect.
Or it could be that she does not have one specific summon, but instead she can summon different creatures, and the creatures she summons depend on the element of your party members. So Electra summons this creature, Pyra summons that creature, Hydra summons a different creature, and so on and so forth. Each creature has different attacks and abilities. For her burst, she opens a rift and summons a plethora of abyssal creatures, i.e. a reenacted cataclysm. This could either be a case where she summons the creatures and they stay on field and do damage, or the summon is only in her burst animation followed by a big new damage and that's it. As it relates to the Nabirius shade of life side of things, she could have a form of bleed slash life draining effect similar to the decay effect I mentioned earlier for Ronova, where in combat one of her passives or abilities continue to drain or suck the life out of opponents. This effect could reduce enemy stats like HP, attack speed, movement speed, attack frequency, defense, resistance, and damage reduction. On the flip side, she could also heal and boost your team member stats, metaphorically giving or breathing life into her teammates. It depends on whether they want her to be a DPS, sub-DPS, support, or a combination. For her weapon, definitely a catalyst, alchemy, books, research, studying, magic. Fits perfectly. Perfect! And for the final shade, Asmoday, the sustainer of heavenly principles. Oh yeah, please don't do some fuckery and make her a pyropole arm. Like, I can see it now. The bullshit. We have already seen her abilities in the game. She uses those cube-like things, so I guess there's not much to say here. Her element is space. I wouldn't mind her using a pole arm, to be honest. As a support, she could expand or shrink slash consolidate the range of team members' attacks and reaction damage. For example, top skill can shrink the range, therefore turning AoE attacks and reactions into single target damage, and hold skill expands the range and makes single target attacks and reactions with a limited range do AoE attacks within a certain range. She could also trap and or bind enemies' movements with her cubes, similar to what she did in her fight with the twins at the start of the game. She could place cubes on the field or create a large cube domain. It records the damage that comes in contact with the cubes or is done in the domain, then after a certain period of time, she unleashes spatial slash dimensional damage based on the damage done. This damage could be true damage or physical damage. This could be 0.5 to 1, 1 to 1, or 1.5 to 1, etc. The multiplier depends on whether they want her to be a DPS or sub-DPS. It could also be a case where the domain duplicates each reaction done inside it. So if a hyper bloom is triggered, for example, the domain triggers a second hyper bloom, a second melt, for example, and this happens for each and every reaction or attack done inside the domain during its duration. The duplicate reaction or attack generated by the domain could be 1 to 1, 0.5 to 1, etc. Again, depending on whether they want her to be a DPS or sub-DPS. For her personal damage, she could do spatial or dimensional damage to enemies with her cubes. She could detonate her cubes to do damage similar to what we saw in her fight with the twins. Enemies who come in contact with her cubes take spatial damage as they will be exposed to a different dimension or space inside her cubes. Her cubes could also contain slash absorb enemies' attacks and then reflect it onto them. She can summon celestial nails to do nuke damage or damage over time, debuff enemies or buff team members. I'm not sure if in lore the sustainer is one who summons celestial nails or if it takes more than one shade. Not necessarily because of the power required to summon the nail, but more so from an approval standpoint, like do you need 2 or 3 shades to give permission to drop a nail? I don't know. But I'm going with her since given her a title, she is responsible for sustaining the heavenly principles, whatever that means. So she summons a celestial nail that does big PP damage. It disables or reduces enemies' defense, shield, resistance, and damage reduction. The nail could also remove status effects of enemies, for example, the wet status from the Hydra Tulpa. I'm not sure why you would want to do that since it makes it easier to vape off of it. Shangling Burr. Other consideration for the shades. In theory, I don't think that the shades need artifacts or would have constellations, but for gameplay mechanics, I guess the playable characters would have. It would be pretty cool if the artifact domain for the shades is located at Celestia. Celestia could physically be added to the map and you could teleport to the door we see in the loading screen. You interact with the door to enter the domain and farm. What kind of creatures or monsters you would fight in the domain though? Maybe previous vision bearers, one of the shades, maybe the sustainer, herself, or the heavenly principles himself, herself, themselves, selves. I'm not sure. I don't know if the heavenly principles is singular or plural, because I don't know. Heavenly principles sound plural, but then they make it seem like it's one entity. I don't know. Okay, let's talk about a light element. As it relates to a light element or power from the light realm, one, we saw the twins using a light looking power in the beginning of the game. However, the Traveler's Kit is bound to be trashed, so that's a waste of time. Two, Bishops and Sovereigns live in the light realm. We're not going to get a playable Bishop, and Sovereigns, if playable, will just use the element that they have authority over, a la Nuvelet. However, if it were to be a thing, I guess we could get Radiant Reactions, Radiant Melt, Radiant Vape, Radiant Bloom, etc. These radiant reactions would have a shining appearance or have a golden hue or outline along with the regular reaction color and a stronger multiplier. Nothing much to say here as it's not going to happen. Moving on to playable characters from Khaenri'ah, I'm not sure if it's worth talking about this, as the only characters we know of are the five sinners, who all have abyssal powers, Dainsleif, who we've seen using a blue-looking power, Arlecchino, who is already out, and we've seen Capitana using Cryo. Piero is from Khaenri'ah, but I doubt he'll be playable. I wonder if the blue on Piero's mask and Dainsleif's blue power has any relation, meaning if they both use a similar power. I'm not sure if we'll meet anyone else from Khaenri'ah, and if so, whether they would be playable. But what I would have liked to see for people from Khaenri'ah are them using abilities and weapons utilizing the power of Azazite. This was the energy source that they used in Khaenri'ah in the past to power their machines and facilities. It was made by extracting pure elemental energy from ley lines and processing it into a usable form, although they later started using abyssal energy as a power source. Playable characters from Khaenri'ah could use radiant attacks by using pure elemental energy, i.e. azazite. These characters could either A. have modified body parts, example arms, legs, etc., from which they utilize its energy source in combat. It depends on how mechanical Genshin wants to make the region. Advanced technology may already be something they are doing in Northcry, with the introduction of Inefa as a playable character, who is a robot. I'm not 100% sure. Or it could be more subtle, more so internal modifications to organs, which allow them to channel and utilize this energy, or abyssal energy as a power source. Similar to how Capitana's heart was modified to convert memories and souls into knowledge from the ley lines. For example, it could be a device implanted in their chest, like the device in Tony Stark's chest from Iron Man. We see that the Ruin Knights and Shadow Husks have like a light in their chest area. Then again, we see them using elemental attacks like Pyra and Geo, as opposed to pure elemental energy. B. They could wear armor, either partial or full body, minus the helmet, which utilizes the power of Azazite or Abyssal energy. C. The characters could wield specialized weapons, which are powered by or allows them to channel or utilize Azazite or Abyssal energy. As it relates to Dainsleif, I'm not sure what the blue power he uses is. I had seen a theory video a while back which speculated that it could be similar or related to the power or energy that we see when we activate Deshet's chess pieces, although those are a lighter blue than Dainsleif's power, so who knows. I think that will be it for the video. Wait, I'm forgetting someone. Last but not least, Paimon, the number one emergency travel companion who likes to eat. What does food do in Genshin? It provides buffs. Therefore, Paimon's abilities could include buffing team members' crit rate, crit damage, attack, HP, ER, defense, movement speed, attack speed, resistance, and damage. The best part? She doesn't use artifacts. You equip different foods in her artifact slots and receive buffs based on the foods equipped. Overall, I've covered all the characters and elements / reactions I wanted to talk about. I would have to say my favorite is Istaroth, if it includes removing the ICD from character skits and reactions, as well as Ronova's ideas. I think the Sustainer skit ideas are the least interesting. Maybe they should just make her a pyro pole arm. At this point, I can't be asked. But I would love to know your thoughts. What do you think about the kits and elemental reactions? Which ability is your favorite? What abilities do you wish these characters would have if they are playable, and which reactions would you like to see in the game? I would love to hear it from you in the comments. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and don't forget to subscribe for more videos. Until next time, peace. I'm out.
Won't you take me